The space station floated in the quiet stretch between two star systems, its silver walls glowing against the endless black as ships of many kinds came and went carrying voices from 100 worlds. Inside its crowded halls were languages mixed, and cultures brushed shoulders. It was a place of trade, a place of fragile peace, and also a place where small things could become very big without anyone expecting them. The many travelers walking through the wide corridors was a human named Mark, his steps steady as he carried a simple old flask strapped to his belt. It was not a weapon. It was not a tool of technology. It was only a container of dark liquid from Earth. But to him it carried something more. There's a memory of home, and he took it with him wherever he went. The smell of the drink was soft, yet strong. It drifted out whenever he opened the flask. A warmth in the cold steel halls of the station. Sitting not far from him in the shared hall of exchange was Lyra. She belonged to a tall, graceful species known for their calm minds and strict traditions. Her people did not consume anything that was not from their own world, for they believed foreign substances would cloud their clarity of thought. They were raised to live by reason, not by desire, and they wore that discipline like shining armor. But Lyra was not fully like the others, for she had always carried a spark in her eyes that asked questions her elders avoided when waited. Her gaze fell on Mark. She noticed the way he sat alone on a low seat, holding the flask in both hands before lifting it to his lips. He tilted it slowly as though it was some kind of ritual. She saw the small rise of steam that curled from the flask. She saw the way he closed his eyes for a brief moment after sipping, and she felt a strange tug inside her chest. Her people consumed food only to fuel the body, nothing more. But here was this human, drinking not only to fill himself, but to feel something deeper, something she could not name. Around them voices rose from merchants shouting offers and station guards making their rounds. But for Lyra, the sight of the human became the center of the hall. She leaned forward slightly, her mind turning questions over and over. Why did he repeat this act? Why did the scent of the liquid seem alive, and why did he look calmer after tasting it? The curiosity gnawed at her until finally she stood, her long cloak brushing the floor, and she walked with measured steps across the room. Mark noticed her before she spoke. He had learned to feel the eyes of others on him ever since he began traveling. The stars, some looked with suspicion, some with quiet interest, and some with open distrust, but the look in her eyes was not like any of those. It was the look of someone standing on the edge of a question, and he gave a small nod as if to welcome it before she could even speak. Lyra stopped a short distance away, her voice even and calm, but carrying a shade of hesitation. She asked what it was that he held and why he kept lifting it to his mouth. He raised the flask slightly and answered that it was a drink from his world, that humans made it from ground beans of a plant and boiled water, and that they called it coffee. He smiled faintly as he added that for his people it was more than drink. It was a piece of home, a way to share time and to remind themselves they were alive. The word alive echoed in her mind, because her people never spoke of life in such a personal way. They spoke of function. They spoke of duty, but not of feeling. She asked him what it did to the body, and why he seemed to close his eyes every time he tasted it. Mark laughed softly and said it gave energy, yes, but it also gave comfort and warmth. He explained that sometimes humans did not drink coffee for the body, but for the soul, for the quiet moment that came with it. Her hands tightened inside her sleeves. She felt something she had not felt before, an ache to know what it would be like to taste what he tasted. Her people would call it weakness. They would say it was temptation. But she could not look away from the steam rising from the flask or from the ease in his face as he drank again. For her, this was not weakness. This was a question of truth. She asked him if it could be shared, her voice quieter now, as though the hall itself should not hear, and Mark looked at her with calm eyes. He said yes, of course, but with a warning that her body might not react the same way, that she might feel things she had not felt before. He told her it was not dangerous, but it was different, and difference was not always easy to accept. She heard his words, but her mind was already moving forward like a river once it breaks free. From stone the flask sat between them. As he held it out, the smell filling the air around her, and her heart beat faster, though she did not know why this simple object held her attention so tightly. The sight of the liquid, deep and dark like space itself, called to her in a way she did not understand. She reached out, her hand slowly, her fingers brushing the flask as if touching it might already change her fate. For the first time in her life, Lyra was about to cross a line her people had drawn. Long ago, in the hall with all its noise seemed to fall away, leaving only her, the human, and the warm drink between them. And in that moment she wondered, not with fear, but with something close to wonder, what it truly meant to feel alive. The flask felt heavier in her hand than she had imagined, and though it was only a container of liquid, she sensed something more inside it, as if it carried a secret not meant to be hidden. Her fingers curled carefully around it, and she lifted it closer to her face, the warmth spreading through her skin like a gentle fire, and the smell reaching her senses in a way that stirred something unknown within her. She had smelled many things before: the metals of her ships, the clean filtered air of her world, the sterile herbs her people used for nourishment. But this was different. This smell seemed alive, rich, layered, carrying both sharpness and sweetness, as if it was telling her that life was not meant to be plain and empty, but filled with contrast. Mark watched her closely but without pressure, his face calm, his eyes patient. He knew what it was to offer something of earth to another species. He knew it was never about the taste alone, it was about the leap of trust and the acceptance of difference. He let her take her time, and when she looked at him once more with a question in her eyes, he simply gave a small nod to assure her that she was free to go forward. Lyra brought the flask to her lips. Her people did not usually taste anything foreign, but her heart beat strongly in her chest as she tilted it slightly. The liquid touched her tongue, hot and strange, and she almost pulled back from the shock, but her pride held her steady. She let the taste move through her mouth and down into her body, and in that moment, something happened that she could never have predicted. Taste was sharp, yet deep, bitter, yet carrying a hidden softness. It was not like the flat, neutral substances she had consumed all her life. Instead, it was like a wave rushing into her, and she felt her thoughts open, like doors swinging wide, her chest filled with warmth, and her mind spun with feelings she had no names for. She felt as if she was falling and rising at the same time, as if every part of her that had been silent was suddenly speaking at once. She gasped quietly and clutched the flask tighter. Vision blurred for a second, not with weakness, but with emotion. Her kind never cried, and yet she felt a sting at the edges of her eyes. She laughed softly, though she had never laughed without reason before. And then she felt a shiver of sorrow. Though nothing sad had happened, she did not understand how one drink could carry so many colors of experience within it, and yet she could not deny that it was happening inside her. She looked at Mark with wide eyes, as if he had handed her a universe wrapped inside a small container. Mark's voice was steady as he asked her how she felt, and she could not answer at first because words were too small for what was moving inside her. Finally she said that it was impossible to describe, because it was not just taste. It was not just heat. It was something that touched her mind and her heart together. He nodded as if he understood and told her that humans drank coffee not only for energy but for moments like this, for the reminder that they were alive and connected and capable of feeling. The hall around them had noticed her reaction. A few eyes turned toward them, whispers passed among different groups, for they had seen her species as untouchable, calm beings who never showed strong emotion, and now one of them stood trembling with strange laughter and strange tears over a simple human drink. Some thought it was poison, some thought it was magic, but Lyra herself knew that it was something far greater than either. It was a key that had opened a part of her she never knew existed. She handed the flask back to him with shaking fingers, but her eyes did not leave it. She whispered that her people would never understand, and that they would say she had been corrupted. But inside her she knew she was not corrupted. She was awakened. She had lived her whole life in control, in silence, in the safety of rules, but in this single Taste she had learned that life could not be caged by rules. A lone life was wider, deeper, brighter. Mark listened and then told her that every human carried pieces of earth with them. When they traveled, some carried food, some carried music, some carried old books, but all of them carried memory and meaning. And when they shared these things, they were not trying to control others. They were only offering a doorway into their way of being. Lyra heard his words and realized that she had stepped through that doorway and there was no going back. Her hands still tingled, her chest still felt warm, her thoughts still surged with new colors. She wanted to hide it from the eyes watching them, but at the same time she wanted to shout it to the whole hall that she had discovered something her people had lost. She wanted to drink again to see if it was real, or if it was only a dream, but she held herself back, for she knew that too much at once might break her. The silence between them grew heavy, but not uncomfortable. It was the silence of two beings who had shared something powerful and who understood that it could not easily be explained. She lowered her head slightly and spoke with a quiet voice, asking him if all human things were like this, and he shook his head with a gentle smile, saying that not all were like this, but many carried meaning, because humans gave meaning to the simplest things. They gave feeling to drink, to touch, to sound, to sight, and that was what made them human. The words settled into her like roots, finding soil, and she thought about her people, who avoided meaning, who feared the weight of feeling, and who built walls inside their own minds. She wondered what it would mean if they all tasted what she had tasted, if they all felt what she had felt. She wondered if they would break their walls, or if they would punish her for even daring to look beyond them. Her heart trembled with the thought, but also with a new hunger to know more. As the noise of the hall returned and the attention of others slowly drifted away, Lyra sat down beside Mark, no longer distant, and asked him to tell her about his world, about the mountains where these beans grew, about the rivers where humans gathered, and about the homes where families shared this drink together. He began to speak, and his words painted pictures in her mind of warm kitchens and laughing voices of tired workers finding strength in the morning, of friends sitting long into the night with cups between their hands. And she listened, as though every word was a drop of light filling the space inside her that had been dark for so long. She realized she had crossed a line, but instead of fear she felt wonder, instead of shame she felt hope. And when she finally closed her eyes, she held onto the memory of the taste, the warmth, and the flood of feelings, and she knew that this single step had changed the path of her life forever. The hours moved slowly on the station, though the hall never truly grew silent, and the ships kept coming and going as if the stars themselves were restless. Yet for Lyra, the noise faded into the distance because her mind was still inside the moment of the drink. The way it had entered her and broken open chambers of thought she never knew were there. She walked beside Mark, now not as a distant diplomat from another species, but as someone carrying a question so large it pressed against her heart. Every step she took, her body still felt light and strange, like she was moving through a dream. The warmth of the drink echoing through her chest, even though she had handed the flask back long ago. She felt laughter rise inside her at sudden moments, and she caught herself before sound escaped. She felt a sting in her eyes when she thought of her people who would never allow this, and she felt something like awe when she thought of the human world that created such a simple thing yet carried such endless meaning within it. Mark spoke to her with patience, telling her stories of his people, not of wars or machines, but of mornings and evenings, of cold days when the first sip of the drink chased away the chill, and of long nights when tired hands and tired eyes found strength again through the warmth of the cup. He told her of families who gathered in small circles, and friends who argued and laughed over cups that were never empty, and she listened to every word as though he was describing a treasure that could not be bought. She found herself asking questions she never imagined asking before. She asked him what it felt like to share the drink with another human, and he told her that it was not just taste, but a bond that grew in silence between two people who sat together. He said that sometimes words were not needed when the cup was passed, and that the drink itself carried the weight of companionship. She thought about this, and wondered if perhaps she was already feeling the edge of that bond with him, and the thought filled her with both fear and wonder. Her people had taught her since childhood that emotions were storms that destroyed reason, and that reason was the only path to strength. But she was beginning to understand that strength might also come from the storm itself, for what she felt now was not weakness, it was not destruction. It was life flowing through her veins, and it gave her courage. Rather than stealing it away, she walked with her head higher, though her thoughts spun like wild winds. Others of her kind began to notice her change, for she no longer carried the same calm mask she once wore. Her steps were quicker, her eyes brighter, her voice warmer when she spoke, and this unsettled them. They whispered among themselves, wondering what had happened, wondering if she had broken some rule, and Mark could see the way they looked at her with suspicion. But he said nothing, for he knew that this was her path to walk, and that no human could walk it. For her later, when she was alone, she touched her lips as if the taste still lingered. She closed her eyes and remembered the rush of feelings, and she realized that in all the years of her life, she had never truly known joy or sorrow or wonder until that sip. She had lived in a narrow box built by her people, and she had believed that the box was the world. Now she knew it was only a shadow, and outside it stretched a sky so wide she could not see the end. When she returned to the hall the next day, she found Mark again, sitting with his flask resting by his side. As though waiting for her, though he did not say so, she sat across from him, and they spoke softly, not of politics or trade, but of simple things. He asked her what her home was like, and she described tall white towers under pale skies, gardens without fragrance, waters without salt. He listened and nodded, but she saw a sadness in his eyes, and she understood why, for her world sounded empty, even to her own ears now. She asked him if he would let her taste again, and he studied her for a long moment. Before handing the flask once more, he said gently that it might be stronger this time, that the feelings might come faster and heavier, but she did not care, for her hunger was greater than her fear. She lifted the flask to her lips and drank once more, the warmth rushing into her body, and this time the flood was even deeper. She felt laughter burst free, and she did not hold it back. Her voice rang through the hall, and heads turned, but she did not care. She felt tears slip down her face, and she let them fall. For the first time in her life, she was not ashamed, she was alive. She was wide open, and every part of her soul was singing. She reached for Mark's hand without thinking, and he let her hold it, his palm warm against hers. She looked into his eyes and said that she understood now. She understood why humans were the way they were, because they allowed themselves to feel everything. The others in the hall whispered louder, now some fearful, some angry, some simply confused, but Lyra did not hear them clearly anymore. She was inside her own storm, and she was grateful for it. She turned to Mark and told him that her people had built walls inside themselves to keep the storm away, but that the walls had also kept life itself away. She said that she could no longer live behind those walls, and that she would never again be the same as before. Mark said nothing at first, only held her gaze, and then he told her that every choice had a cost, but that sometimes the cost was worth it because what was gained was far greater than what was lost. She thought about his words and realized that the cost would be heavy. Her people would see her as tainted, her leaders might strip her of her place, yet she also realized that if she returned to her old life, untouched by this experience, she would be dead inside, even while her body lived. She whispered that she would rather live one day full of feeling than 1,000 years empty. And in that moment, she felt free for the first time, free from rules, free from silence, free from the cold clarity that had caged her. And as she looked at the flask still warm in her hands, she knew that this small human object had become the key to her freedom. The station did not stay silent about what had happened, because silence was impossible in a place where hundreds of species lived side by side, and where every rumor was carried like fire through dry leaves. By the second day, the story had already spread from one corner of the station to the other. The story of the diplomat who had tasted the human drink and lost her composure in front of everyone. Some said she had been poisoned. Some said she had been bewitched, and others whispered that perhaps she had seen something. Her kind had forgotten long ago. Her own people were the most unsettled because they had always prided themselves on perfect control, and now one of their own had shown tears and laughter and open emotion in front of strangers they gathered in their chambers high above the trading floor, and spoke of her with voices filled with concern and anger. They asked how one human could shake their dignity so easily. They asked if she should be punished or recalled, and some even suggested that the human should be banned from the station to prevent more corruption. Lyra stood before them when they called her to answer their questions. Her face was calm, but inside her chest, her heart still carried the fire of the drink. She spoke carefully, yet with a strength that surprised even herself. She told them that she had not been poisoned, she had not been controlled. She had only been awakened. She said that what she tasted was not dangerous but alive, and that the feelings she had shown were not shameful but true. Her words fell heavy in the chamber, because they had not heard such defiance in generations. The elders pressed her harder, asking if she understood what she was risking. They reminded her of duty. They reminded her of tradition, but she no longer felt the weight of those chains. She looked at them and said that she could not go back to the silence, because once she had tasted life, she could not choose emptiness again. Her voice trembled, but it did not break, and though her people stared at her with disapproval, she felt stronger than ever. When she left the chamber, she found Mark waiting in the lower halls. He had heard the whispers and knew what she was facing. He asked her quietly if she regretted it, but she shook her head firmly and told him that even if the whole station turned against her, she would not regret it, because for the first time she felt like more than a shadow. Mark gave her a look of respect, though he also warned her that choices like this always carried a price. She only nodded, for she already knew it. As the days passed, tension grew. Her people kept a close watch on her, and many of them avoided her as though she carried a disease. Yet others looked at her with secret longing, as if her tears and laughter had planted a question in their hearts that they could not ignore. Mark saw this too, and he told her that sometimes one voice could start a ripple that spread further than anyone expected. She wondered if that was already happening, even as her leaders tried to silence it. Turning point came when the council of her people sent word that she must stand before the entire gathering and renounce what she had done. They wanted her to declare that the human drink was corrupt and that her reaction was weakness. They wanted her to erase the meaning of that moment and return to the mask she had once worn. She listened to their order and felt the weight of the choice pressing on her like a mountain, for she knew that if she obeyed, she would keep her place among her people but lose herself forever, and if she refused, she would break ties that could never be repaired. She walked with heavy steps to the hall where the gathering waited. The chamber was filled with her kind, their tall forms lined in perfect rows, their eyes cold and expectant. Mark was not allowed inside, but he stood just beyond the doors, silent and waiting. She could feel his presence there, even without seeing him, and it gave her strength. When she stepped into the circle at the center, the eldest among them asked her to speak, and his voice carried the weight of centuries. She looked around at the faces watching her, so many eyes demanding control, demanding denial, and she felt her pulse quicken. She thought of the taste, the warmth, the rush of feelings, the way her heart had opened. She thought of laughter breaking free and tears falling without shame, and she knew she could not betray that truth. So when she opened her mouth, her voice rang clear. She said that she would not denounce the drink, and she would not call it poison. She said that it was not weakness to feel, it was strength, because only by feeling could they truly live. She told them that for too long they had hidden behind walls of silence and fear of emotion, and that those walls had kept them half alive. She said she had discovered a piece of humanity that reminded her what life was meant to be, and she could not go back to emptiness no matter what punishment they chose for her. Gasps rippled through the chamber. Anger flashed in the eyes of the elders, yet in the crowd she also saw something else's spark in the faces of some of her people, younger ones, especially, who had always wondered what lay beyond the strict boundaries, and now heard one of their own speak. The forbiddance thought aloud. She stood tall in that moment, knowing that even if she was cast out, the spark would not die. It would spread quietly like hidden fire waiting for its time. Elders dismissed her in silence, their decision not spoken, but heavy in the air. She knew punishment would follow yet. When she stepped out of the chamber and saw Mark waiting, she felt lighter than ever. She told him what she had said, and for the first time since leaving her people, she laughed openly without fear. He listened, and then handed her the flask once more. She drank, and the storm of emotions returned. But this time it did not shake her. It steadied her, like a flame that belonged in her hands. Her people might turn against her, the station might judge her, but she had chosen her truth, and nothing could take that away from her anymore. She lifted her head high as she walked beside the human, knowing that the path ahead would be hard, but also knowing that it would be hers, and not one written for her by others. The night on the station did not bring darkness because its lights never dimmed yet. Inside Lyra's heart, there was a new kind of light that was brighter than any artificial glow. She had walked out from the judgment of her people with her head high, and though the air had carried the weight of their anger, she felt no chains upon her spirit anymore. She walked through the crowded halls with a strange calm, for she knew that whatever came next, she had already chosen the path that belonged to her, and not to the silence of her ancestors. Mark walked beside her, saying little because he understood that some choices needed no words. He only kept his steady presence close, as though to remind her that she was not alone in the vastness of the galaxy. She felt the warmth of his company, like she had felt the warmth of the drink, both of them carrying the same quiet strength that came not from control, but from allowing life to flow freely. As they reached the lower levels of the station, she noticed groups of her people watching her, some with cold eyes filled with disapproval, but others with a flicker of something else, curiosity and longing. She realized then that her refusal to denounce the drink had planted seeds among them, even if the elders tried to bury those seeds, even if they punished her. The seeds were already alive, and one day they would grow. In the days that followed, the council sent orders that she was stripped of her position as diplomat. She was no longer to speak for her people, no longer to stand among their leaders. She felt the sting of this punishment, but she did not bow her head. Instead, she accepted it with steady eyes, for she had already gained something greater than rank. She had gained herself. When she told Mark of the decision, he only nodded and handed her the flask again. She took it without hesitation and drank deeply, and once more the feelings rushed into her body, but this time they did not confuse her. They did not overwhelm her. They moved through her like music, and she embraced them fully. She laughed softly. She let tears fall freely. She felt awe rising in her chest and peace filling her heart. And when she lowered the flask, she said with certainty that she was alive, and that was enough. Mark told her that humans carried many simple things with them across the stars: food, drink, music, stories, and that each one could be a spark to others. He said that what had happened to her was proof that even the smallest piece of earth could change a life. She listened and knew his words were true, for she was living proof of it. She thought of how her people had ruled themselves with silence for centuries, and how one small sip had broken the silence within her forever. She began to spend her days walking the station, not as a diplomat, but as a traveler. She spoke with others. She listened to the voices of species she had once ignored, and she found herself smiling often. Her people avoided her officially, but individuals still came in secret, young ones who asked what she had felt when she tasted the human drink. She told them gently without pushing them. She described the warmth, the rush, the freedom, and she saw in their eyes the same spark that had awakened in her. She knew then that she was no longer alone. Her choice was spreading quietly like a hidden current beneath the surface. Mark eventually prepared to leave the station, because humans rarely stayed long in one place, and when he told her, she felt a sudden ache inside her chest. She realized that she had grown attached to his presence, not because he had given her the drink, but because he had offered it without fear or judgment. He had shown her that humanity did not hide from feelings but embraced them, and she had learned through him what it meant to live openly. She thanked him, not with long speeches but with a steady gaze and a voice full of gratitude on the day of his departure. They stood by the docking bay, his ship waiting in silence. She handed back the flask, though every part of her wished to keep it, but he smiled and pressed it back into her hands, saying that it was hers now that she had earned it. She held it tightly against her chest, and for a moment she could not speak. She only nodded slowly as her throat tightened with emotion. When the ship lifted into the void, she stood watching until it vanished into the dark sea of stars. Then she looked down at the flask in her hand and whispered softly that this was no longer just a drink. It was a piece of truth, a key to life itself. She lifted it once more to her lips and felt the warmth rush through her. She closed her eyes and smiled, letting the storm of feelings flow freely because she no longer feared them. From that day onward, she carried the flask wherever she went. Sometimes she drank alone, sometimes she shared it with others curious enough to taste, and each time she saw the change in their eyes, she knew the spark was spreading further and further. She was no longer a diplomat of silence. She had become something else, entirely a voice of awakening among her people. Elders continued to denounce her. They tried to silence the whispers, but the more they tried, the more the whispers grew. She walked among her kind with open eyes and unhidden feelings, and while many avoided her, some began to follow her, quietly, step by step, drawn by the freedom they saw in her face. The storm had begun, and nothing could stop it. Now, years later, those who remembered that time would speak of her, not as the diplomat who lost her place, but as the one who first broke the silence. They would say that it began with a single sip from a human's flask, and that it changed the path of their people forever. But in that first moment, when she looked at the flask and whispered to herself, she spoke not of history or legacy. She only said that now she understood what it meant to be human, and in her heart, she knew she would never let that truth go. The end.